The primary difference between a university that uh, does whatever it wants, believes whatever it wants, and thinks whatever it wants is that they just don't have to deal with reality very much. They don't. If something goes wrong, they hand us the bill, and they, do it over and do it over and do it over, and hand us the bill, and eventually, maybe, some point in time, they may in fact find a way to do something a little bit better. That's how bridges were built. They built them, and then they destroyed them, and eventually they learned where the limits and the boundaries were. And at that point they were able to tell us something that was valuable to us. And everybody said, "Oh, thank you." Of course, they didn't include all the costs that came involved. Our world is being gambled on theories that have no basis in reality whatsoever. And the difference between a university graduate and the common man or woman is as simple as we have to deal with reality every day. They do not. And the consequence of that is they believe games are in fact something that has value because it amuses them. So we're going to look at the real consequences of being wrong when it comes to trying to ignite sunfire here on Earth. The sun is, visible to you. I'm sure some of you probably went blind from the eclipse by looking at it. The sun will burn your skin from 91 million miles away in summer if you stay out too long. That sunfire is what they're trying to bring here. They have several machines that are running, and those machines are going to ignite sunfire here on Earth at some point in time, because they are able to do that. At some point, the experiment will yield a reality of ignition. And when that ignition occurs, the same fire that is on the sun that burns your eyes and sun burns your skin from 91 million miles away through space, that fire will suddenly be on our Earth, and we will not be able to extinguish it. So it is very important to you. It is very important to me. They're going to burn me too. So, we need to understand their theories, and we need to understand what the cost of being wrong is. It's not a game. Unlike anything else they have ever done, that has they're mutilating genetics and trying to make nature fail and so on, and that will have similar consequences. But for the most part, the most immediate threat and the worst threat that we face as a world population of humanity and life itself is the fact that universities around this world have all agreed they want to ignite sunfire here on Earth. And they base that on a number of theories. There are no facts, just theories. So, we have the opportunity to stop them if we find their theories to be wrong. You do. I can't do it by myself. The courts will not. They believe in the university, and the university is God, and nothing can stop the university because the university is God. So you have no help there. And your government officials, of course, they have agreed to spend the money, and you look foolish if they suddenly turn out to be terrorists. So they won't step in the way either. They want the university to be right. But of course, if the university is wrong, our entire world burns. Even the atmosphere is ejected from all the heat for the 10 million degree flame that is on the sun. So it is very important to you. And it is very important to me, and it's very important to every single life and every future life, and even the planet itself, because if the sun becomes or our planet becomes a sun, the solar system itself will be somewhat destroyed. You can't have another sun in this solar system without destroying the planets themselves. So, everything depends upon whether they are right or not. Even the solar system itself, because that's what the ignition of another sun means. And of course, there's no place to hide. It's not going to be instantaneous. Fire is not an explosion. Fire is like a forest fire. It grows and it grows and it grows, dependent upon how the fuel is consumed. So we really do need to understand what's going on. You really need to understand what is going on and why this is not a good idea for our lives, our future, our world, everything. It is the greatest abomination of ideas that could ever be. And that in and of itself has predictions. So, let's go on with that. The first theory, or the first machine that tried to ignite sunfire here on Earth was the first machine that could ignite sunfire here on Earth was at the National Ignition Facility in Lawrence Livermore Laboratories, San Francisco, in America. If you don't know, they have 192 lasers, powerful lasers, all surrounding one tiny little bitty spot. And they all focus those lasers onto that tiny little bitty spot. And they turn them on all at the same time and declare they can, in fact, produce 180 million degrees of heat at 500 billion psi. That's what they state. They tried for 3 years to ignite sunfire by combining two atoms of hydrogen into a helium atom. They call it fusion, and that is what they told you that sunfire is. Well, the National Ignition Facility tried for 3 years with their machine that produces 180 million degrees and 500 billion psi, and did not create fusion. They did not combine two hydrogen atoms into a helium atom, and they proved themselves wrong. Fusion, as they declare it to be, does not exist. And they refuse to admit to that. They don't produce any information that qualifies what their research did do or did not do. They simply hide it because they want to continue doing what they do, both at the National Ignition Facility and other ways. They have, moved on to something else. And of course, part of that is igniting atomic explosives inside their little laser bin. But that's an irrelevant issue for the moment. So they did not produce fusion. They in fact proved that their claim of fusion, which is to combine two hydrogen atoms into a helium atom, is what produces all the heat from the sun. Well, if the sun was in fact heating us in that way, two hydrogen atoms combining into a helium atom to create that heat would mean that helium was everywhere in the universe, as every sun would be doing the same thing. So where is the helium? And of course, helium is one of the rarest elements in the known universe. So the sun is not producing helium to any degree. And their conclusions about combining two hydrogen atoms into a helium atom is completely false by their own tests and experiments. That is important because with that theory of fusion, combining two hydrogen atoms into a helium atom, they declared that the experiments they were doing were safe. Well, they're not safe. Not in any conceivable way. They literally gamble with everything on Earth by being wrong. Wrong means that a nuclear fire will be ignited and it cannot be extinguished, because unlike their theory, which is that there's not enough gravity here on Earth, so the fire will just go poof and escape into space. We'll ignite it, take the heat, and the fire itself will just go poof, escape into the vacuum of space and leave us alone. Well, any realistic common person knows that gambling, every life on earth, is not a part of it should not be gambled with. Such a failed theory is that. So, I want you to think about the reality of their theory and the consequence of their action. They are saying, upon ignition of an atomic fire, heat that burns you from 91 million miles away, that it will just go poof into space and leave us alone. If it doesn't, our whole world burns and every life dies. That's the cost of being wrong. Do you believe them? Are you willing to risk your life and your world on their theory that the fire will just extinguish itself? There is no other plan. There is no other theory. There is no other option. It is a 10 million degree heat measured by the universities themselves off of the sun. So we can't approach it. We cannot do anything once it ignites if it does not extinguish itself. And it will not. So let's review their experiment just a bit. Their experiment goes in one of two directions. Either the mass of the sun, the mass inside the sun, is not on fire at all, and it's just so pressurized that that heat radiates out of it as if it was a leaking pressure vessel. That's one theory, and it depends upon the idea that there's a graviton element in the universe somewhere out there that we cannot identify. Or more correctly, they say it's an element that's 15 times heavier than lead. And that means that it's an element 15 times bigger, an atom that's 15 times bigger than the lead proton neutron, and it has 3,000 plus electrons spinning around it. Well, there's nothing on the periodic table, and nothing by men that can prove this exists. They declare it as a possibility because of a black hole. And they say, well, black holes, and they're about that size. That's what they do. So they say that the sun is, basically got a black hole at its core. Well, they sort of say that. But of course, black holes do not emit light. They don't radiate anything. There's no space, and there's no electrons, actually. So that part is irrelevant. But the idea that they can gamble our planet, our world, our lives, on a fantasy element that does not exist, cannot be proven to exist, just absolutely fails every test of reality, other than a black hole, which cannot be proven to be so, because a black hole is said to be not even light emits, and of course the sun emits light. So it's not a black hole. Now is it? So anyway, their assumption is, of course, that well, they have so many assumptions. It's just beyond. Anyway, so let's decide if a mass could actually combine itself into a form that would be like the sun, which they expect to be, millions of miles across. And the answer to that is that if a mass can be combined in such a way, then the reality of our Earth could prove it. In other words, mines go down as much as 4,000 feet, and people drill even farther down than that. So when we take out that material, if gravity is compressing it to the point of making it several times heavier than the element would be up here on Earth, then that would be proven. You would be able to weigh it. This is the element. It would now weigh differently. because it is compressed to the point where it is in a different state and actually becomes a different element. And of course, our Earth doesn't prove any of that. Take an element out of the Earth from any depth and it still weighs the same because it is still the same element, which means just combining more and more and more mass on top of each other does not necessarily, and in fact will not, become different elements just because of the compression. So you know, that's because electrons actually have a law that governs them, you know, and the protons, the whole atom thing, is a structured element. Anyway, so their idea of a pressure vessel is completely erroneous. And look at the sun. Just the solar flares themselves prove that it ain't so. You know, the idea of a pressure vessel on the Earth which is pulling planets into it requires the idea that energy goes in and it doesn't come out. Or if it comes out, it has to have some method of coming out that we don't know of, because there's nothing on the sun that reveals it. So everything they suggest to you is going into the sun and staying there has to make the sun bigger, or it has to change the sun in some form or fashion, which means that if it's changing the sun, then there's going to be a different heat realm for the sun. You know, something else is going to change with it, and so on and so on. But we're getting off the page here. These are, you know, irrelevant details. The part that matters is they are gambling our Earth on things that are just plain fantasies. They're gambling your life, you're gambling the future of every life, even gambling the solar system on theories that cannot be proven in any form or fashion. Not one. So let's just talk about a nuclear fire for a second. So a nuclear fire is the burning of atomic bonds, the thing that holds the atom together. That holds, you know, atoms are very, very stable. We know that. And when they explode as in an atomic bomb, and the energy released proves that there's a lot of energy contained within an atom. So you cannot contain energy within anything unless you have something to contain the energy with. And that means there's an energy that goes one way, which is physical energy, outward, and there's another energy involved that goes inward. So to contain the energy that goes outward in a balanced state. Otherwise an atom doesn't exist, because you can't have energy that is forcing itself outward, which an atomic bomb proves. There's energy that forces itself outward in there. And so you have to have something to contain that energy. Well, that is what the neutron does, actually. So nonetheless, what's important here for today is that they're burning the bond between what is an outward energy and what is an inward energy. They're releasing those forces, and that's where solar gravity comes from, and that's where the outer forces that we exist in time today. But that too is complicated in some degree. So, just like a chemical fire burns the bond that holds a molecule together, a molecule is the combining of different elements into a more complex state. You know, you have more than one element being combined. An element is, you know, one thing. A molecule is two things or more. So for a chemical fire, you cut the elements apart, and the energy that held them together is what produces the fire that we know here on Earth. Just like TNT is different than an atomic bomb, the difference between tearing the molecular bond apart and tearing a atomic bond apart for fire produces realistic different energy levels, just like TNT and an atomic bomb. So we're back. So a nuclear fire is again the burning of a bond that holds an atom together. So that's what they're trying to do. When they gave up basically on the pressure vessel idea at the National Ignition Facility, they are using tokamaks energy machines. These things basically melt the inside of an atom to a degree. So they're trying to force those atoms to ignite on fire. That's what they're doing. They're not trying to combine two hydrogen atoms into a helium atom. They're not trying to pressurize atoms into igniting on fire or exploding or whatever it is they think they're doing. They're trying to ignite a nuclear fire. There's a machine in Germany that's been very, very dangerous levels of all but ignited. And there's a ITER machine coming in France that is going to use more fuel and will probably ignite a nuclear fire. That is their purpose. Nations around the world are contributing money to that. You know, universities have gathered together and said this will be a great idea. But of course, a nuclear fire is a nuclear fire. And that means that it's burning atoms. And burning atoms means that we cannot possibly control the fuel source. So once they ignite it, the entire planet being fuel becomes a sun. Literally, it becomes a sun because we can't put it out. There's nothing that you could throw at it, nothing you could do to it to remove the fuel. Nothing. And of course, the universities will tell you that they know about the sun in various ways, but the reality is they don't know about the sun. Their claim is that the flames on the sun are 1 billion miles long. Now, how is it that their experiments from this planet, their experiments in any form, can see within 1 million miles of flame? How? And they also state that they have measured solar flares, which is the addition of more fuel being burned instantaneously than the norm, is roughly 12 million miles long. That's how long a solar flame can be. They call it a solar flare. So you have 1 million miles long flame, which is verified by a 12 million mile long solar flare. They don't see into the sun. It's all theory. There is nothing else. It is all theory. So let's review the reality of that. You don't know what the sun is. You can only think about what the sun is. And if you don't think, you can't know anything. You can only imagine. You fantasize and tell stories. Listen to me, I know, so what? Well, they don't know. And I don't care until they start gambling our entire world on their theory. Doesn't make any difference what the hell they think until they gamble our whole world, our whole lives, our whole everything, even the solar system itself, on their theory. At that point, it does matter because they become terrorists. Being wrong means we all die. So let's assert that maybe they're wrong. How about that? Let's assert maybe the university professors, even though they all agree, basically all agree, that yes, it'll be a great thing because they believe that the fire will just extinguish itself. And they believe that because they base it on the graviton, an element 15 times heavier than lead, which does not exist except in fantasy. And they say that, well, the planets that surround us, they have to be drawn into the sun. They have to orbit for a reason, and that means that the mass has to be there, and that means that the gravity has to be there, and that means that the pressure has to be there. Well, no, it doesn't. As I explained to you in the construction of an atom, there is a force inside the atom that pulls energy goes in or energy goes out. It's one way and it's the other way. It's both, actually. And there are dark energy and physical energies involved, and that's not for this discussion. But anyway, the fire is the gravitational pull. That's a much more defined theory than theirs. And you can believe it or you cannot believe it. That doesn't matter. Because what matters is being wrong ends life on this planet. That's what matters. So, are you a worshiper or are you a realist? A worshiper doesn't need any evidence, doesn't believe anything about truth or reality or fantasies or anything else. But a realist does. Are you a worshiper or are you a realist? I am a realist. I need the evidence. I want to see truth. I don't believe in fantasies. Theories are not enough. Don't gamble my world on your idiocy. Don't do it. But media in particular promotes the idea that the university is God. You have to listen to the university. The university is everything. The university knows everything. The university cannot be wrong. The university will figure it out. The university is God. They'll experiment and experiment and experiment until it finally gets to be done right. We can't do that with a nuclear fire. A nuclear fire is 10 million degrees. A nuclear fire burns atoms for fuel. A nuclear fire cannot be extinguished. A nuclear fire is too hot to even approach. There's absolutely nothing we can do with a nuclear fire. We cannot control a forest fire at 3,000 degrees, much less an atomic fire at 10 million degrees. Those are the realities. And you need to understand what the consequences of being wrong are again, and that is the whole world dies upon ignition of an atomic flame. So let's continue. The university says the core of the sun is tremendously hot. It is the hottest part of the sun. That's the core. Well, the core cannot be on fire, because if it was, all of the fuel that creates the fire, all of it, would be being consumed. You can't burn all the fuel without burning all the fuel. How is that not true? Does the gas in your gas tank in your car burn all at once in an instant it's gone? No. Burns a little at a time, and that gets you down the road until it's out, and then the fire goes out and you're stopped. So we know that the fuel is not all being consumed in the core at the same time. We know that. The university says that the sun is made almost entirely of hydrogen and their graviton. And they assume that because there is some hydrogen escaping from the sun, which they measure with or they view with a spectrometer. Regardless of all that, let's just imagine that they also say that the sun is the heaviest mass in this solar system, which means that, if it's made out of hydrogen, how does that happen? The lightest element in the known periodic table is not the heaviest mass in the universe or in the solar system. It's not. And so, well, you got to pressurize it and make it small. Well, seriously, the only known way to make hydrogen into a fluid, much less a solid, is to supercool it to 400 degrees minus Fahrenheit. And then it's very hard to contain. So that's not what the sun does now, is it? It doesn't supercool anything. And since they have abandoned the idea of a pressure vessel, with the experiments at the National Ignition Facility, and they have turned fire then as the source of heat from the sun, which is clearly evident by the machines that they have built. The reality of the sun being made out of hydrogen disappears entirely. Heat produces outward pressure. That's what heat is. Heat is outward pressure. Well, it's also radiation, but let's just leave it simple. Heat is pressure out, not pressure in. So the idea that the sun is made entirely of hydrogen, or basically all of hydrogen, is just a story beyond fairy tale levels. It doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. It cannot exist. And if the sun was made out of hydrogen, and that fuel was being consumed, which it must be to create the fire and to create an energy release that we feel here 91 million miles away, energy is being released. That means fuel is being consumed, and that means that hydrogen is not what happens there. We know that for sure because we have 5,000 years or more of recorded history, maybe it's 7,000 by this time, of recorded history that says the life back then was basically the same as the life is today, or at least you can see that the environment was very, very similar by their words and statements. The temperatures had to be very, very similar for that too. Which means if the fuel was burned off, even if hydrogen was a part of the system, let's look at the sun, evaluate just how much hydrogen has to be consumed to produce that kind of heat, and then by volume reduce the size of the sun accordingly, which of course the university does not do because they don't want to. It interferes with their theories and philosophies, which are of course nothing but fantasy and fairy tale. Even though they say, we know, they don't. Or if they do, they're just simply trying to crucify you. It is that simple. So anyway, the sun hasn't diminished in size to any degree over those thousands of years. So what can or cannot be the source of fuel? And that is, of course, atoms. The only thing that you could actually, get that much energy from for an extended period of time is an atom. So the fuel source on the sun is an atom. And the way you get energy from an atom is to burn it. Sustained energy. A nuclear explosion disappears almost instantly. The force pushes out and it is over. A fire, on the other hand, consumes as it goes. So we know we have a nuclear fire on the sun. The list is so long. Their theories, people who are supposed to know it all, the people who believe them, are failed theories. They theorize that geneticists can cause the disciplines, the order, and the balance of biology to fail, and then they will discover how to put it back together and thereby play God with life. And they're deliberately trying to cause life itself, the biology of genetic instruction, to fail completely. Because they think they can become God when it fails, because they figure they will be able to map it out and understand how that happened, and then they can understand how to put it together. So they can play God and make their own creatures and prove that they are God by making their own creatures. And of course the reality of it is they can't play God. Well, they can play the destruction of life, which is Satan. That's just the term known by humanity. And I'm sure there are other terms assigned to some other religion. Regardless, they are literally trying to destroy the earth. They're literally trying to destroy nature with genetic consequences that cannot be reversed. Think about it. Cannot be reversed. AIDS couldn't be reversed. We can't reverse it. They don't know how. But of course, think about it. If they cause genetic malfunction to any degree, they become powerful. You give to the university because you want them to create a cure for what ails you. Well, if they make the things that ail you, then of course they get all your money and all the power that goes with that, and they get everything that they could possibly want because you need them, so they say. The list is very, very long. We are surrounded by threats in every conceivable way, and we cannot escape those threats once they have gone past the point of no return. Once a nuclear fire is ignited, you're done. There's nothing we can do. And people say, well, God will never let that happen. Well, Noah's flood might prove, at least to some of the people out there, one religion or two, that God would let that happen. Dependent upon you. Do you believe in Noah's flood? The evidence is true. The evidence is all the fossil fuels that we burn could not exist as they do without a worldwide flood. You have to gather the materials together, you have to bury them all at once, and you then cover them up with thousands of feet of material. It is a flood that does that, and only a flood. And it was a very full earth when that happened, and so on and so on. But literally the list is so long of threats that we face, that you are hiding from, that we must not hide from. We must not, or the world itself will die. We live in a day when extreme arrogance rules our world. There isn't any doubt about that. The universities say that everything about nature, everything about the planet, everything about life itself is just chaos that happened to accidentally come together, and there's nothing more complicated than that involved. On the other hand, they say everything, every little speck, every little sand, every little piece of anything that they do is extremely engineered, and comes because they are technically advanced and they know everything. Well, they don't. But they do know enough to kill us all. Playing God is not a small thing. That is what they're doing. They're playing God. They're trying to create the same fires as on the sun here just to prove they can. It isn't really any more complicated than that. They want to do it just to prove that they can, because you can't be God if you can't do everything. They are destroying genetic disciplines, balance, and order to destroy nature. Literally to destroy nature. Nature is the building of a life, a body of life, and that body of life is constructed by the genetic disciplines involved in the chromosomes and the DNA that they are trying to make fail, and trying to interject one species into another and cross all boundary lines and everything else. The university, by their arrogance and nothing less or nothing more, are literally attempting to play God, and in so doing they are intending and doing everything they can to destroy life on Earth. That's not a thing about knowledge. That has nothing to do with knowledge. They are not about knowledge. Knowledge does not take extreme risks with all life or planets. That's not knowledge. It's certainly not wisdom. Understanding doesn't take fantasies and cause them to be threatening our entire planet and our world. You know, nothing the university technically does, apart from very little things that don't truly matter, not to the life of a planet. They do. If you want to survive, you're going to have to think for yourself. You're going to have to act for yourself. You're going to have to stop the extreme experimentation of university playing God. You're going to have to control your leaders. And we are 8 billion people on this planet. And I know that includes old and young, sick and not sick, but we are 8 billion people. And these are a tiny few strangers to you who don't care about your life whatsoever, or they wouldn't threaten it. They'll tell you they'll wipe away every tear, but what they're doing is creating a sea of tears instead, and it will not end well. Our planet, our world, our lives are in the balance. And if you don't start accepting the idea that you must, bring them to court, you can take them to court, bring them to court, and question what happens when this goes wrong. That is the important part of this message. What happens when their theories and their experiments and everything that they do goes wrong and we are left to pick up the bill? We are left with nothing we can use to survive this life. What happens when a fire ignites and we cannot put it out because it burns atoms? They are literally trying to ignite atoms in Germany and in France and in America and more. Literally trying to ignite atoms on fire. There's nothing else. There is no fusion. There is nothing else. They want to ignite atoms on fire. That's what they're doing. That's what their machines can or could do. And that is what they're doing. How are you going to put an atom out when it's on fire at 10 million degrees? Being wrong is the whole planet dies. Well, the reality is, take them to court, make them prove what happens when their experiments go wrong, in the simplest terms possible, as I have demonstrated to you. You can go to www.justtalking7.info or the sites that came before that, or, talk to yourselves, talk somewhere. Communicate or we're all dead. You don't have to believe me. You have to prove that they are not wrong. Because even a tiny little bit wrong means we all die. Isn't that worth an investigation? Examining the evidence of what is being done and identifying the true threats that we exist or don't exist because of. Think about it.